to help early career scientists become more competitive grant applicants through firsthand experience with peer review, and also to enrich and diversify CSR's pool of trained reviewers. Please note that the slides and the recording will both be posted on the CSR website on or around April 20th, so you can find it archived there. Now, before I introduce our speaker for today, please also note that there's a Q&A feature in the Zoom webinar. So throughout today's presentation and at the end, please feel free to ask any questions using this Q&A feature. You are muted, but you can ask questions through Q&A. We'll do a live Q&A session following the presentation portion of today's webinar. Now, it's with great pleasure that I introduce today's speaker, Dr. Lisa Steele. Dr. Steele is the Chief of the Population Sciences and Epidemiology Integrated Review Group here at CSR. Dr. Steele's been at CSR since 2011 and comes to us from the CDC in Atlanta, where she worked in global public health, focusing on biological and behavioral epidemiological surveillance of sexually transmitted infections. Prior to taking the role of chief, Dr. Steele served as a workshop coordinator responsible for the continuing education of scientific review officers here at CSR. So now let's go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Steele.
Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning to some of our people joining. Today, I'm going to talk to you about opportunities and resources to help early career scientists navigate the NIH. I'm going to share my slides. Okay, so the goals of today's webinar are to learn the basics of the NIH application and peer review process so that you can gain insight into preparing your own applications and then learn how you yourselves can participate in the peer review process. Another goal of this presentation is to learn who the people are that you want to contact at each stage of the peer review process so that NIH isn't such a big black box to you. So I think everybody's pretty familiar with the fact that NIH provides support for much of the biomedical research that's funded in the United States. But I don't think everyone is as familiar with the mission of NIH. So I'd like to just share that with you. The NIH mission is to seek fundamental knowledge about the nature and behavior of living systems and the application of that knowledge to enhance health, lengthen life, and reduce illness and disability. And what you can see from this mission is that the interest and excitement of NIH in both basic research and applied research is baked right into that mission statement. So NIH consists of 24 institutes or centers, one of which is the Center for Scientific Review, which both Jessica and I work at. We're one of the few centers that doesn't actually fund research. We just focus on scientific review. So we basically get all of NIH grant applications, as well as some applications from other HHS agencies. And our job is to make two assignments for these applications. One is to the institute or centers who's going to consider it for potential funding. And then it's to a CSR or an institute review group for the scientific merit evaluation. So this slide tells you the overall process of how your grant application goes through NIH. It's received at the Center for Scientific Review in the Division of Receipt and Referral. And after that, it is assigned again to two places, to an institute for funding and then a review group for scientific merit evaluation. So the scientific merit evaluation is the first level of review, the study section, at the end of which is produced a summary statement, which is provided to the second layer of review, which is the institute or center. Now, the program staff at the institutes, together with their advisory council of experts, will decide on whether those applications will get funded in consideration of the research priorities of that institute, and they themselves will make the funding decision. So NIH has basically 3 ongoing cycles of review per year. Right now, we're in the January through May cycle. We're still receiving some applications that will be reviewed from May to July. And then that second stage of processing at the advisory council level will take place in September to October, meaning that the earliest possible begin date is December. And so these are always overlapping. We're always in one part of the cycle. And on this slide, you can see those standard review dates. And again, these 3 columns are the different review cycles and the different mechanisms. So we want to help you to navigate the NIH. And one of the first things that we'd like you to do is make sure that you're subscribed to the NIH Guide Notice. This is really how the NIH will communicate to you any changes in policy, any FOAs that have been announced. And for instance, if you can see on this slide, the post-submission material policy that has been amended for the COVID pandemic, for instance, is one of the things that was published in the guide notice. So it's a good thing to keep in mind so that you're always in the know for everything that's going on at NIH. So the first step when you're applying to NIH is to actually find a funding opportunity announcement or an FOA. And one of the best places to go to understand that, well, first let's talk about what kind of FOAs there are. So as you can see from the slide, this is a smattering of the different types of FOAs. There's program announcements, which identify priority areas or funding mechanisms in one area. And if the program announcement, for instance, has a special review date, receipt date, different than the standard dates that we had just looked at, it will be called a PAR. There's also RFAs that are used when you really understand that NIH wants a focused area of science to be for applications. And then things like a NOSI, Notice of Special Interest, is simplified notices of specific research interests. So again, ways to NIH to let you know when they really want to focus on a specific question or area of research. And to find those FOAs, the best website to start with is the grants.nih.gov, where they actually have a listing of all the FOAs from NIH. In addition to going to this general website, you can always go to the specific institutes that you're interested in, and they also have the FOAs that are available for their funding on their institute's webpage. But looking at an example of, this is a parent announcement. So this is the parent announcement for the R01 grant where clinical trials are not allowed. You can actually see which institutes are participating in the FOA right there listed components of participating in organizations. So you definitely want to make sure that the particular organization that you're interested in actually subscribes to the particular FOA that you're interested in. Another important aspect of these FOAs is that listed at the very bottom are the contact people that can answer any questions of the FOAs. There's always a contact person for the review part, again, that first stage, scientific review. And then there's a contact person for the program staff so that you always have someone to ask questions about when you don't understand an FOA. Another key component from our point of view is the section 5 of the FOA, which will outline the review criteria by which your application will be evaluated. It's part of our job to make sure that we're completely transparent as to how your application will be evaluated. So that section really spells it out for you. Another important resource when you're considering picking an FOA is actually talking to a program officer, because they can tell you whether the research that you're proposing fits within that priorities of the Institute, their strategic plan. They can help steer you toward funding opportunities that may be available in general or also specific for your career stage. They can help you find a study section for review. And they also, after you've received that summary statement, they're the person that you're going to ask about advice for resubmission of your application. So how will you find this magical person? Well, the NIH Reporter website is really going to be your best friend. It has a matchmaker function where you can input your abstracts and aims and then see a list of funded grants that are similar to your science. It gives you that list that also contains the institutes that fund that scientific area, as well as a link to program officials and the study section that reviewed that grant. So there's a lot of information that you can get from that NIH Reporter site. As to getting your application to the right study section, as I mentioned before, when your application comes to CSR, the Center for Scientific Review, it goes to Division of Receipt and Referral, where officers in that part of CSR are going to look at your application and then start the process of deciding where the best scientific fit is. So there's going to be several people at CSR, including chiefs like myself and Jessica, who are going to look at your application and try to find it the best review home. I'd say this to assure you that if you do not do the steps I'm about to outline right now, your application will still find a great review home. But of course, it's always good to be involved in the process of your application. So if you go to the CSR website, excuse me, and you put keywords in, you can do a keyword search that could lead you to an appropriate study section, or you can use this assisted referral tool. And the assisted referral tool, again, you put in the title and your abstracts or specific aims, and then it will come up with some matches for different study sections that might be appropriate for your science. As you can see, the first column is the scientific review group. That's the actual meeting that it suggested. And the second column is the integrated review group. This is the group of study sections that are grouped by different areas of expertise or different scientific areas. So basically, by going to the IRG, you might also be able to find another study section that might be a better fit from your science. Now, when you go to that website for the scientific review group, read the guidelines, because that is going to be how you're going to see if your science fits. But also scroll all the way down, because at the bottom of that web page will be a list of overlapping study sections. The way that we design study sections is that so that there is some natural overlap, so that there are choices for where your science can be reviewed. And that bottom section will list the overlapping study sections, as well as a description of how that overlap works, so you might be able to find an even better fit. So once you've made those decisions, you have an idea of which ICs you want to consider your application for funding, and then which review group that you think might be the best fit. You want to enter that into the assignment request form, okay? So this form has spaces for you to request the ICs, for you to request the review groups, and also to identify any conflict of interest that you may know about. In terms of what you can suggest for us specifically, the form has space for you to suggest specific expertise that you think would be really key in reviewing your application. What you don't want to do is list the name of recommended reviewers. Obviously, you can't be unbiased for that recommendation, and we want to make sure that your review is always unbiased and expert, but we very much welcome your suggestions of expertise. So we do have a few tips for preparing your application. The first of which is start early, okay? You want to remember that your application must actually be accepted twice. So there's the submission of your application into grants.gov, but then, as I said, officials from NIH and the Division of Receipt and Referral are actually going to look at your application to make sure it's complete after it goes through the grants.gov process. So you want to be really careful that you've thoroughly looked at your application for all of the necessary components before you submit. Now, the submission deadline is 5 p.m. local time on the due date, okay? That is the hard submission deadline. You want to remember that if there are errors, that can cause rejection of your application. And you may get warnings that are error-free so that your application is actually accepted. But again, when NIH personnel actually looks at the application, they may reject it at a later point. So although there is a 2-day viewing window during which you can resubmit your application and make the changes, you want to remember that's within the deadline. So as it says on this slide, if you submit 3 days early, you get those 2 days. If you submit 2 days early, you get those 2 days. But if you submit 4 hours early, you get 4 hours, okay? Now, there are certain NIH rules that allow you to submit your application late. And then we do have a late submission policy that you can look up. But if you submit late without an acceptable reason, it will be caught and withdrawn. So make sure that you have an acceptable reason and you include that reason in your cover letter if you are going to submit late. So the way that you can trace your application through the NIH system is the ERA comments. So you can see again whether your application was accepted, you can track where it's going to be reviewed, and then the outcome of review. You can see the identity of the scientific review officer as well as the program officer. And in your ERA Commons account is where you're going to make sure that you have entered your date of your terminal degree so that your early stage investigator eligibility can be calculated. That is going to be your responsibility. The new investigator is an automatically detected by our system, but we need your help to be able to calculate your early stage investigator eligibility. So there's a lot in your Commons account that can tell you about where your application is. And you really want to remember that that's where you check to see whether it was actually accepted. Now, we say that you're submitting your application, but actually your authorized organizational representative in your sponsored research office is actually the person who does the submission. So you definitely want to contact them and find out about their deadlines and their requirements so that they can help you get everything in on time, because the accuracy of the submission ultimately is your responsibility. So again, submit early. And the other thing is get as many eyes on your application as possible as you're going through the process. Remembering that if you can't see your application in ERA Commons, neither can we. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the review process so that you're better able to make a competitive application. First of all, being that I want you to remember that CSR has a great website with a lot of resources to help you at all stages. We don't have as much time today as we'd like, so we won't get to everything, but this website is a great resource. So the scientific review officer is responsible for reading your application, recruiting those reviewers, and assigning them to the application. Then we manage the meeting and any conflict of interest and prepare that summary statement that is used by the institutes and centers to ultimately decide the funding. So what we do is we find those reviewers and we assign 3 or more reviewers to your application and give them 5 to 6 weeks to do that written evaluation of your application. And in a nutshell, what they're looking for is really to understand the significance of your application, the so what factor of what your application will specifically do for the field and what its impact will be on the field. They're looking to be excited, right? And they want to be able to understand clearly your intentions, so you don't want to assume too much. You also want to be realistic with what you're proposing and note any limitations in the study. So one of the things that's important is that you have a rigorous evaluation of the scientific field so that they know that you understand where your research will fit and where your research specifically will advance the scientific field. So a clean, well-written application is really important. So I emphasize again, having other people read it and make sure that there's clarity and that it's well written is really important. You want to remember that reviewers like you, have a very full-time job and that they're volunteering their time. So you don't want to make them fight to understand what you're trying to do in your application. And some common problems are pretty much the opposite of some of the things that we just discussed. The lack of a strong scientific foundation, basically you didn't give them a really good scientific rationale for why you're doing your application, why your approach, for instance, is different than things that have been tried before, why this particular question is exciting. You want to make sure that you are telling them the limitations of what you're proposing. Even if they can't be addressed, it's important to outline them. And definitely being realistic about amount of work that you can actually accomplish. And you want to not only tell them what you accomplish with this particular application, but where this will lead in the future. So future directions is also important to be clear in your application. So, like I said, all 3 or 4 reviewers are going to submit that written critique and then preliminary scores that allows us to set the discussion order of the meeting. So we discuss about half of the applications, the top half of the applications, based on those preliminary scores. And the committee unanimously decides what will be in the lower half that are not going to be discussed. And during that discussion, we do cluster the applications to make sure that like is reviewed with like. For instance, the new investigator R1 applications are always clustered together for review. And then within those clusters, again, we're discussing the top half, and we discuss them in random order so that no reviewers has any preconceived notions about the merit of an application based on when it is discussed. Now, everyone who is reviewed in the meeting will get this summary statement, but there will be a difference in the summary statement of those who are discussed and not discussed. Key elements of the summary statement are the identity of your program officer found in that top left corner. And if your application was discussed, then you'll get this impact score, and depending on the mechanism, you'll get the percentile. Also, your early stage and new investigator eligibility will be indicated on the summary statement. And you'll get the written critiques of all 3 or 4 assigned reviewers, no matter whether your application was discussed or not. And if your application is discussed, you'll also get that resume of the discussion itself, as well as the scores. Another key component of the summary statement is a link to this What's Next website. As I mentioned, the next stage is to talk to your program officer, but it gives you even more steps about what to do next. So we can tell you about the review process, but of course, the best way to really understand it is to be part of it. And as Jessica mentioned, we have this early career reviewer program that is meant to train and educate qualified scientists to become critical and well-trained NIH reviewers. Exposing them to the peer review process helps them to be hopefully more competitive as applicants. And we hear that all the time from ECRs that, either they wish they had had it before they wrote their recent R1, or how prepared they feel for writing their next R1 application. And for us, it's wonderful to enrich the existing pool of NIH reviewers. So you can apply to the ECR program using this website, and your actual service will be just one time, because again, this is really to expose you to the review process. But you will only have to review 2 applications as the 3rd reviewer. So we're trying to expose you and enrich you by the process, but we're not trying to overburden you in a time that you're really trying to get your career started. So briefly, the qualifications are that you have to have at least 1 year of experience as a full-time faculty member, assistant professor, or a researcher of a similar role, but you've not served as on an NIH study section aside from being a male reviewer, that you've not held an R1 or equivalent grant as a PI, because again, this is supposed to help you to be more competitive for that kind of role. But you have submitted a grant application and received a summary statement, because we found that actually being part of the system in this way enriches the experience much more for you. As far as your research, we want you to have evidence of an active independent research program, and that can be demonstrated by at least 2 senior author papers in a peer-reviewed journal one since your doctoral degree and 1 in the last 2 years. But again, going to the ECR website will help you to see these qualifications in more detail. So in summary, I definitely hope that you have an overview of who the key people are in NIH and who you can contact when. So before you submit, again, you want to identify and talk to a program officer who can really help you to understand which institutes and centers would be interested in your science. They can also help you with the decision of the review group that it might be good to review your science. Now, after you submit your application before the review, your scientific review officer is the person that you talk to, and they can help you understand that reviewer assignment. If you have any questions about why your assignment is a particular scientific review group, as well as any questions about the process, and to give any further suggestions about the expertise that you would like. And then after that summary statement is produced, again, it goes back to talking to your program officer who can help you with those next steps. But if you have any trouble finding these people or you don't know exactly who to talk to, please know that you can always email us at askexperts@csr.nih.gov, and we'll be more than happy to help you. And with that, I think we're ready for some questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Lisa. So for our first question, someone would like to know, how do I volunteer as a reviewer to learn more about the NIH peer review process?
So that is going to be, if you qualify for the ECR program, we would love you to apply for that and get into that database where the SROs can search and find you to participate in NIH review. If you no longer qualify, for instance, you just got promoted to associate professor, you can email the SRO directly and provide your CV and tell them that you're interested in serving in that study section. ECR is a special program, but it's by no means the only way that you can participate in NIH review.
All right, and for our next question, what job title will one need to have to qualify, or better yet, disqualify one from serving as an early career reviewer?
Well, because we're really focused with this program on early career scientists, you must be an assistant professor or an equivalent role to participate in the ECR program. So if you're an associate professor, again, you're not going to be eligible for this program, but you can still participate in the review.
And we have another question about the ECR program. What's the probability of getting selected for the ECR program?
So since we changed the requirements and basically allowed us to use 2 ECRs for meetings, and that happened about in September of 2019, about 1,000 ECRs served per year. And so we have this database of eligible ECRs for which the SROs recruit that currently has about 1,000 names in it as well. So the wait to serve has been significantly reduced by us, using more than one ECR per meeting. But it's really, the ECRs aren't distributed evenly across the field. So it really depends on how many ECRs are in your particular field in that database. So that we recommend that after you apply, or maybe even before, you can contact SROs running the panels in your area to express interest in serving. We're not saying that because we're saying you have to have an inside track to be, chosen as an ECR, but it just helps us keep these people on our radar. So it just helps SROs to kind of keep aware of the people who are available.
Great, thank you. For our next question, has the NIH considered opening up the ECR program to postdocs?
So in September 2019, we did convene a working group of the CSR Advisory Council. So that's a council of external experts that help advise us on our mission. And that particular working group contained a number of recent early career reviewers. And that group did discuss broadening the program, and together with the CSR Advisory Council. Now, the first priority in peer review is always expert and fair review. And our advisory council was of the opinion that reviewers should have a clearly established independent research program, established expertise before participating in peer review. So we were also asked by the community whether the program could be opened more broadly to allow observers, people who didn't participate but just could observe the meeting. But unfortunately, NIH policy restricts access to review meetings to those with a need to know. So we can't include observers whose sole purpose in attending is their own training.
Great, thank you. For our next question, what equivalent opportunities do you have for mid-career scientists to serve on review panels, and what are those qualifications?
So, much like the previous answer, we definitely consider, the expertise of reviewers. We consider their extramural funding, your publication history, and your record of accomplishments when looking for reviewers for our peer review panels. So, if you're not an early career investigator and you are interested in serving, again, please feel free to submit that CV to the SRO of the panel you're interested in so that we can evaluate you for suitability.
And on to our next question. As a new investigator coming from a clinical background and not having many publications, what should I do to make myself competitive to apply for grants? Should I apply now or should I wait until I get several publications under my belt?
So this is a great area where you want to talk to your program officer for some guidance. And if you, again, haven't found a program officer yet, you can use that NIH Matchmaker tool on the NIH Reporter site to find a program officer to talk to. They will welcome talking to you either by email or by phone call because this really is part of their job, to provide guidance to investigators about what mechanisms are the best fit and whether their research goals fit into the mission and priorities of the funding institute.
We've also had a lot of questions about this. What's the difference between a new investigator and an early stage investigator?
So a new investigator is someone who hasn't received an R1 or a major grant ever. But an early investigator is a new investigator who's within 10 years of his or her terminal research degree or medical residency. So you do want to remember that both the new investigator and the early investigator status is only applicable to R01 grant applications. So if you have an R21, your status as an investigator is definitely considered during review, but you will not get that new investigator, early stage investigator mark because it is not an R01.
All right, here's a good question. I've never applied for NIH funding. What do I need to know to get the process started?
So that's where going to the grants.nih.gov website is a good resource for trying to find the funding announcement, which of course is the first step. The other resource, and again, using the matchmaker tool to find a program officer, you also want to go to your sponsored research office because they most likely have a lot of resources that can help you. I also want to share another website that will probably be really helpful to everybody, and that's this career path website that we have. And it's the researchtraining.nih.gov website has a lot of great resources for you depending on your stage of career. And it has links to things like fellowships, things like, and it allows you to actually do a little choose your own adventure and tell what the career level is, and then it tells you which applications, FOAs that you're available for. So that's, again, some of the resources that we have to help you, as well as there's a lot of resources on the CSR website.
Great, thank you. Another question. What's the current policy on resubmitting an application that has not been selected for funding?
So as far as resubmission goes, you can submit one resubmission. You want to make sure, and so one A1 grant application. You want to make sure that if you decide to do a resubmission, you have to include that introduction with the response to previous review. And that is the way to do a resubmission. You can submit an application over and over and over again as an O1 application. So you can submit really the same application over as an O1 application. You just have to make sure that if you decide to submit it as an O1 application, that you make no reference to previous review at all.
I would also add before you submit an A1, talk to your program officer.
Definitely, definitely. It's definitely something that they can help you to what to focus on, how to interpret that summary statement and make it better so that, the resubmission will do better in review.
Mhm. Great,
Good
thanks.
point.
All right. Oh, so on to the next question. This seems to be a popular one as well. Are institutions and researchers from outside the U.S. eligible to receive funding from the NIH?
So there is where, yes, the answer is yes. They are definitely eligible to apply for certain funding from the NIH. Foreign organizations are eligible to apply for NIH as the prime institution. And you want to, again, read the funding opportunity announcement, the FOA, in section 3, which will describe the type of institutions and organizations that are going to be eligible to apply, and also provides information on the types of individuals that are eligible to apply. Because there are some cases, especially with the SBIR, STTR small business grants, where the funding opportunity announcement may explicitly exclude applicants from outside the US. And there also are a lot of training opportunities that limit the eligibility to US citizens or permanent residents. So again, this is an area where the FOA can really help lead you, as well as talking again to a program officer who will be able to also lead you to the kind of grant applications that are eligible.
Great, thank you. So on to our next question. What defines if a proposal will be sent to a special emphasis section or special emphasis panel, I'm assuming?
Yes. So there's several different situations where it's sent to a special emphasis panel. One is, if you remember back to the funding announcement outline slide that we had, there's those program announcements, PARs. And certain PARs, because they're focusing on a specific topic, are decided to be reviewed together in a special emphasis panel. RFAs, where there's a set aside amount of money for a specific topic, those are typically reviewed again in their own review group. And then there's other types of applications, for instance, applications that are from study section members that can't be reviewed in the study section because the members, develop kind of a family environment. So we put those applications in a special emphasis panel just so that they actually can be reviewed by experts as well and don't suffer from being a member. So there's some example. Jessica, if you have more, please jump in.
I think that covers it very nicely. Okay, so we have another new investigator question. Can you serve on a review panel as a new investigator?
Absolutely. So you can serve, like we said, as an early career investigator if you qualify for that. If you don't qualify, the ECR program, if you qualify for that. But yes, you still will be eligible to serve as a reviewer, as a regular reviewer, as long as your qualifications and expertise meet the needs of the study section.
Another question, are there review opportunities for associate professors who have not yet submitted an NIH grant, but who have several publications?
Absolutely. So that's a case where you wouldn't be eligible for the ECR program, but instead you would go ahead and send your CV to the scientific review officer, who will then be able to evaluate whether you're going to be a good fit for that particular meeting.
Great, thank you. So on to another question. Can the program officer also assist with what is best to include in the response to the summary statement or critiques, I'm assuming?
Actually, that's part of their job, is to help you to respond. Not only can they, but that's exactly what they need. They are there to do, is to really help you interpret it and to help you respond. So it's exactly the person who's helping you.
We have a question about scoring and percentile. How does the percentile relate to the impact score?
So that's going to be different for every study section, but the percentiles are meant to really even out the scoring for a particular group over the cycles of the particular study section. So We can't tell you the exact calculation for each study section, but it's basically a mathematical calculation meant to really even out the impact so that the scores and the impact are even for the study section over the years.
Great, thank you. So here's another question. In the case of reviews of grants that have different review criteria, for example, DP5s, that have heavy emphasis on institutional support or facilities and career development plan, how are the reviewers prepared?
So we actually take reviewer training very seriously. Okay. The reviewers are prepared to evaluate the grant according to those special review criteria. Again, that section 5 of the FOA is what we use to prepare reviewer training materials so that everyone is prepared for the specific FOA that they're reviewing. So we we train them as a group typically, and we do a Zoom just like this right now to train the reviewers, as well as we're also paying attention to their written critiques to make sure they're focusing on the right thing. And we are actually actively involved in the meeting to make sure that those review criteria are adhered to.
Great, thank you. So on to another question. Can the grants be reviewed by several IRGs, and why not?
Well, I didn't actually say the number that was on the scribe for how many grants we get, but I think it was something like 65,000. So as you can probably imagine, we have our work cut out for us trying to review everything by one study section and doing it by several others wouldn't be practical, but it also um, doesn't really, I don't think, resolve in a better review. So the study sections, although I did say that they're overlapping so that there's usually more than one home, they really are geared to review certain types of science. And we build the expertise of those study sections to review certain types of science. So when we find the fit, we are confident of it. We're confident that we can give you a fair expert review within it.
All right, thank you. On to the next question. Can you consider a candidate for ECR if the candidate just got their first NIH grant?
So it depends on the type of NIH grant. If they've just received, again, an R1 or equivalent grant as a PI, then no, you're not considered for the ECR anymore, because one of the goals of that is to make you more competitive for getting that first major NIH grant. But if you have another grant like an R21, you're still eligible for the ECR program.
So this one is with respect to grant assignments. Are there any steps an applicant can take if they do not agree with the study section assignment for a grant application?
Actually, there is. So once you, again, are following in the ERA comments and you find out that your study section has been assigned, I encourage you to look it up and look at the guidelines and see if you think it fits. If you think it doesn't, that's the time to go ahead and email the SRO and open the dialogue about seeing whether there's a better fit, or at least to understand the fit that is done. It is actually the chiefs, so people like Jessica and myself, who do the actual assignment to study sections. So usually the SRO gives us an opinion, but in the end, we're going to talk to you about it. And we can explain why we chose what we did. We can talk about maybe there's another alternative that might be a great fit. But absolutely, you should definitely understand the fit of the study section. So please contact us and we would be more than happy to explain it to you.
Thank you. So on to the next question. How do you find SRO information for career development awards with special study sections?
So usually what you want to do is, again, at the FOA at the very bottom is a review contact. You can email them and they can usually lead you to the SRO of that particular special emphasis panel. Sometimes it is listed on the IC's websites, who is in charge of a specific, career development program. That's also a great person to reach out to. But again, eventually the ERA Commons account will identify the SRO. So I understand sometimes there's a bit of a delay and you're anxious and you want to email somebody, and that's when you can do those steps. But the ERA Commons will let you know the SRO of your review group.
And for our next question, for some proposal submissions, like the MIRA, there's a program officer listed under the PA. After the study section meets, for each study section, there will be a different program officer assigned to that study section. Uh, so which program officer should we contact to discuss the review?
That's a great question. You want to contact the program officer that's on your summary statement. Often when they list a program officer on the FOA, that may be the program officer who was responsible for writing that FOA, or the person who's really in charge of organizing that FOA, especially if there's a lot of different institutes that have signed on to it. But the actual person who's assigned to your application will be different or may be different and assigned on that summary statement. So you definitely want to contact the person who's on the summary statement. Good question.
So we have another question about the ECR program. Can you elaborate what you consider senior author? Is that corresponding author?
Yes, I believe in this interpretation, senior author can either be the first author or the last author.
And corresponding.
And corresponding. There you go. Thanks, Kirsten.
All right, we have another question. Can we extend our early investigator status due to the COVID-19 pandemic?
I do believe that there is an NIH policy about that, and the best place to go for the details of that policy will be on the COVID's webpage for NIH. There is a section for applicants, and it lists all of the special policies for the pandemic. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but I do know that all those policies are listed on that website.
And we have another question about R15s. So many study sections seem not to review R15s. Is there additional advice for identifying an appropriate study section for an R15 application?
So there are some study sections that don't review R15s themselves, but that doesn't mean the IRG, the Integrated Review Group, a group of study sections doesn't review R15. What they may do is they move all of their R15s to a special meeting. So that's why you may not be in a study section. What you may be in is a special emphasis panel that reviews all of the R15s for that particular group. So that if you get referred, if you ask to be part of that study section and you end up in a special emphasis panel, that's probably what happened. And so the expertise will be important, exactly what you want, because these are the R15s for that study section go to that specific panel. So there's another place where reaching out to the SO and asking, okay, I asked for this study section. Why am I in this special emphasis panel? They'll be able to explain that to you.
All right, we have another question about ESI status. How does ESI work with the multi-PI applications?
So the ESI status and new investigator status has to be for every PI on the application. So if there is a PI who is not of that status, then the application is not designated as that status. So that's another reason why you may submit your application and be like, I'm a new investigator in ESI and it's an R1, so why isn't it designated as that? And you have a co-PI who is not a new investigator and not an ESI. That is the reason why it wasn't coded that way.
So here's another question about the process. Is it recommended to reach out to a program officer after you submit a grant to find out when you are likely to hear back?
We do not recommend that, because at that point, review hasn't even happened. So you really want to wait until you get that summary statement. That is the key point after which the program officer can really help you. Because until then, everything is pretty theoretical, right? So once you get that summary statement, they're able to discuss whether, this is something that is possibly fundable, or this is something that you want to start working on a resubmission for. But they need that information before they can help you. So the time to contact a program officer after you submit is really after that summary statement has become available.
Great, thank you. Here's another one about new investigator status. If I have an R21, will I be considered a new investigator?
Well, again, that depends on what you're submitting. So if you're submitting another R21, no. But if you are submitting an R01 and you don't have any other R01 equivalent grant for which you're a PI, then yes, then you would be considered a new investigator.
And what is the advantage for a new investigator for an R01 application?
So there's two advantages. First of all, you will be clustered with other new investigators during the discussion, during review. So you won't suffer by, being discussed right next to someone who's been in the field for 20 years and has a million grants. So we cluster you in review. And then some institutes have different funding pay lines for new investigators. So that's the second kind of advantage.
Here's another one about the ECR program. Can the ECR attend a study section when they're applying for a grant at the same time?
So if you have a grant in a study section meeting, you cannot be a reviewer in that meeting because it's against the law for you to be there and reviewing other people when you're yourself are competing in the same time for kind of obvious reasons. So you can't be an ECR in the meeting where your grant is actually being reviewed. You can be an ECR of a separate meeting. So in the same review cycle and a separate meeting, you have an application in study section A, you can be an ECR in study section B. But if you have an application in study section A, you cannot be a reviewer in study section A for that cycle.
Great, thank you. So our next question is, I have submitted an application. It has an impact score, but not a percentile. Does this mean it will not be funded?
So that not everything that goes to NIH is percentiles, and that's a decision that the institute makes for that particular FOA or mechanism, et cetera. So again, really to make that kind of decision about what will be in the funding range is something that your program officer can help you with. But not getting percentile doesn't mean anything other than that particular institute chose not to percentile that particular type of grant.
And for resubmission A1, is the PO listed on the new A0 summary statement still the point of contact?
That is a good start for your point of contact. Definitely after you've received the summary statement and are looking for guidance, that is a great start. But things change with personnel like anywhere else. So it may not be that same program officer, depending on how long you waited to do the resubmission, may not be assigned the same portfolio. So they're a great start, but sometimes you might have to reach out to someone else in the institute. And that's where either using the matchmaker or going to the institute's website and kind of looking at, hey, what part of the NIH did that person work? Maybe I can look at the program director or the boss of that program officer and email them and make sure, if you're not getting anything back from the person that you emailed, that you can find out who the new person will be.
And here's another question about the Early Career Reviewer program. If you participate in the ECR program, will you then be added to the study section review group after your service is over?
So when you're reviewing as an ECR, you are what's called a temporary reviewer or an ad hoc reviewer, which means you're just invited for that particular session. The study sections do have a membership, but the membership is actually a process by which more senior investigators are added to the study section membership, and they have all sorts of qualifications, which include typically having an R1, so you're not really going to be eligible for membership yet. And it's probably a little bit of a relief to you that just serving as an ECR doesn't make you have to be a member coming 3 times a year for 4 years. It's definitely something that starts your road to potentially being a member in the future, but no, you do not become a member from serving. It's a completely different process.
Great, thank you. So we have a question about NOCs. Regarding funding announcements, do notices of special interest have designated funding?
That depends on the institute. So that is, again, another question that's better to ask the program contact. That's not something that at CSR we try to remain, our job is to remain independent of funding. So those kind of funding questions are really a great place to contact the program officer listed on that NOC.
Here's another one about ESIs. How are the percentiles adjusted for ESIs?
So we don't adjust the percentiles for ESIs. Again, the only thing that is done in review to give an advantage to the new investigators and or early stage investigators is to cluster them during review. We do not percentile anything differently by status.
Another question about scoring. For K awards, are only impact scores considered, and what impact scores are fundable? Another funding question.
Exactly. So for K awards or any award, the when you ask the question one more time, because I want to make sure I understood it correctly.
For K awards, are
Okay.
only impact scores considered? And what impact scores are fundable for a K award?
Okay. So basically, any funding information has to come from the program officer. I can tell you that, as far as the review process goes, we consider these overall impact scores in deciding what's discussed and what isn't discussed. But as far as what is fundable, you're really going to need to talk to the program officer of this specific institute that you're considering, because they all have different pay lines.
All right, so we have time. Let's maybe do one more. I know we're getting close to the end. Should I talk to my program officer again when I have my introduction ready for my resubmission, if I already talked to him after I received my summary statement?
I think that's a great idea to get that kind of their input as to whether, what you understood of the concerns raised by the assigned reviewers is actually what you're addressing in your introduction. I think there's no reason why you wouldn't.
Great. Thank you very much, Lisa. And thanks to everyone for participating today and for these really great questions. Just as an additional reminder, we're going to post the recording and the slides on the NIH CSR website on April 20th. So all of this information will be archived there for you to access. If you have, any questions, there's the Ask the Experts mailbox. You can reach us at. You could contact Lisa. You can contact myself. We're always here to answer any questions you may have about peer review. And thanks again for participating. And we're going to go ahead and wrap it up for today.
Thank you, everybody.